Hello and welcome to today's webinar. This is the second in our kind of lockdown special series of these IOR webinars. Hopefully there won't be too many more and we'll be out of this lockdown. My name is Jimmy Hinchliffe and I chair the England and Wales chapter of the Institute of Operational Risk. And today's topic is a really excellent one, and it's a topic that's been requested many times, and it's on the subject of operational resilience. And we have a great set of speakers, and we'll basically be using the same format for the event as last month. So each speaker will be giving a brief kind of introductory comments, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions from you, the webinar audience. Before I ask the speakers to give a brief introduction to themselves, I just want to give a very quick plug for the Institute of Operational Risk. So if I move on to the next slide. So the IOR was founded about 16 years ago, and it's the only professional body that is focused just on operational risk as a discipline. And we do a lot of things. The main focus, however, is on events. So last year, for instance, within England and Wales, we hosted 10 events, and you'll see there that we had some great people who hosted and sponsored our events on a very wide range of different topics. Something we did that was very exciting back in 2018 is that we launched the Certificate in Operational Risk Management, and this has been extremely popular, and I definitely recommend checking this out. If you decide to do the Certificate in Operational Risk, you get basically a year's associate membership of the Institute, which gives you access to obviously all the events that we run, but also gives you access to the members section of the website, and in there you can find the sound practice guidance notes, which have always been very popular. And I actually have very good news on the SPGs. So some of them are a little bit out of date now, and so there's been a big piece of work underway to update those. And I can tell you that the first 3 of those should be coming out within the next few months, including on embedding operational risk management, risk culture, and risk appetite. So 3 really good hot topics. And then by the end of the year, we hopefully will have 10 of those SPGs updated, which hopefully will be really useful and will be popular. The other thing just to mention about the member section of the website is that you can also find the archive of all the webinars that have been run and materials from those events. For this series of webinars, you will also be able to find in the members section the slides and the recordings of these events. So definitely recommend joining, and then you get access to that wealth of information. This slide just gives a bit more information on the quorum, but you can find a lot more details on that at the website. So now we come on to today's event, and I'd like to just now ask each of the speakers, starting with Sarah, just to say a few words of introduction.
Thanks, Jimmy. Hopefully everybody can hear me. So I'm Sarah Black. I'm a partner at Deloitte. I've spent 20 years almost working within our risk advisory practice, focusing on financial services. And as part of that, really have been working with clients through all that time, supporting them on their journey of change, digital transformation, risk and regulatory compliance, and operational resilience. So I look forward to speaking with you all and answering any questions you may have throughout this session.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. David, could I ask you to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I left MUFG at the end of last year to set up NDS, focusing on operational resilience. Because when I looked back at my kind of 30-odd years at MUFG, where I'd worked in kind of front, middle, back office, virtually everything all my time there, I was somehow or other focusing on resilience, although it wasn't called that at the time. From originally business continuity, disaster recovery, then setting up operational risk, incident management, communications, etc. And then lastly, essentially running the back office, where I guess I was kind of in the first line of it. So when I look back, this has been, you know, a real interest, and I would say a passion over those years. So it's exciting that it's now maybe getting the spotlight that it deserves.
Great, thanks very much, David. Thibeli, could I ask you to give a quick word of introduction? Thibeli, I think you might be on mute.
Yeah, I was on mute. Sorry, apologies on that.
Operational risk at webinars, yes.
Yeah, good afternoon. As I was talking away there, introducing myself to myself, I'm Thibedi Malebo, all the way from sunny, not so warm South Africa. As we entering our winter season, I've been in the operational risk fraternity for about 15 years now, and I've been working with, I started off in business continuity management and moved into operational risk, and went to be a system owner for an in-house built operational risk tool for Standard Bank, and now I'm back as the group head of business resilience for Standard Bank. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Thibeli. So if I move on to the next slide. So as I say, we got the same format as last time. I think operational resilience was already one of the hottest topics pre-COVID-19. So we had the discussion paper back in 2018, which was reputedly the most downloaded DP ever on the PRA's website. I'm not quite sure how high a bar that is, but anyway, it's all relative. It was very popular. And of course, we had the CPs issued last December. So I think the key message is that this post-COVID in particular is going to be really the biggest topic. And under the BCBS operational resilience group, it's obviously going to be a global issue. So on that note, I would like now to pass over to Sarah to give her opening comments. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to spend the first 10-15 minutes covering the kind of our Deloitte house view, which, as Jimmy mentioned there, aligns to the consultation papers that have been issued from the UK regulators. And that will include our view of some of the prerequisites that organisations need to consider to support and help with the journey towards resilience, as well as 5 practical steps to support that execution. I'll also reflect a little bit on where we are today and some of the learnings and lessons taken from the current and ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So if you can move on, Jimmy. So let's just the kind of journey so far, really. So as we've all mentioned, COVID-19 and the consultation papers before that, really the spotlight has been on business continuity, you may traditionally call it, and resilience. And our view and what this means is ultimately, I believe, going to fundamentally change the way a number of organisations and the individuals within organisations think about resilience. Employee safety and business continuity plans have been escalated. Remote working established for many as the default operating mode, and many organisations of which have had good success with adapting very quickly to that remote operation home working facility, but also potential slowdowns in other operations. So there's an obvious kind of demand and supply chain activity throughout the operations. So some areas are accelerating and therefore needing to meet demand, such as call centres and the like, whereas others at the moment may be in decline. So in the face of all these challenges, our view is resilience will and is vital. You've got near-term issues of cash management for liquidity and solvency, which will remain paramount. But soon and now, and has been emphasised by the regulators, businesses need to act on broader resilience plans, looking across the complete industry and potentially looking at their own competitive positions. And as we're all aware, the population as it stands today is going to go through an experience kind of prolonged uncertainty and potentially some financial stress. Now, resiliency, known to many, is the ability to absorb a shock. And our belief is that you can come out of it better if you're looking towards the future survival and long-term prosperity. And therefore, resilience for us is likely to be viewed as a strategic objective for every organisation. It's also fair to say before COVID-19, the environment in which many of your organisations are operating has changed. So has the challenges of protecting your customers, customer preferences, driving banks and other financial institutions to operate more connectively, to increase digital processes, and meet new and different expectations, and therefore manage and adapt to new risks. And really, operational resilience for us is the outcome that many are going to be seeking, and therefore how we must manage those operational risks effectively. And our view, it will require that mindset change. 3 things we pulled out on this slide here. Really, the mindset changes around assuming disruptions will happen. They are inevitable, and organisations need to learn to be able to reduce their impact. So preparing for an operational disruption will be as important as preventing one, but it's accepting a culture that things will go wrong. Secondly, kind of considering risks a little more broadly. I've already mentioned about some of the changes within the complex environment, digital transformation, cyber risk, for example, and our belief is that operational resilience now will need to consider both strategic, regulatory and operational risks. And therefore, the role that operational risk managers play in supporting that will be key to both minimising financial losses and maintaining the ongoing provision of important business services. And finally, operational resilience is a board level consideration. I'll come on to this in more detail, but it's the consultation papers and discussion papers have made very, very clear expectation on the role that boards need to take with regards to operational resilience. Your organisations and firms need boards that will ask and challenge with the right questions to ensure that operational resilience has been given and remains with the right priority across an organisation, and therefore also supporting the right operating model and culture to support resilience throughout the firm. There needs to be clear sign-off and accountability. Boards are responsible for ensuring their SMS, so under the senior manager regime, SMF 24 is held accountable, but how is that delegated and how is that managed throughout each of your organisations? Now, if we move on again, let's look at the journey. So regulators, as we've all called out, they've been monitoring operational resilience of financial services pre-COVID-19, and actually it takes us right back to the financial crisis back in 2008. There's been a large number of IT failures, some very public, resulting in both tiered chairman letters and also the Treasury Select Committee, which we've pulled out here. The original discussion paper that we mentioned earlier was one of those that was downloaded, and it had some great guidance in there and really brought it to everybody's attention. And then in December last year was the updated consultation papers, which extended some of the requirements around impact tolerances, important business services, and the role of the board. And it also set out the time frame. So although we've seen the date move for the original consultation paper closing from April to October, the original timeframe then laid out a 3-year requirement from when the regulatory framework takes place. And there's a view that that will continue. Particularly now looking at what we've learnt and as we're going through the COVID-19 pandemic, the regulators have been looking across all firms at how they are refining their existing business continuity and resilience plans and how they're going to approach governance of operational resilience and maybe the quality of some of their crisis and communications response. Therefore, it's our view that the current UK regulatory proposed approach will really be strengthened and actually highlight the importance and the resilience of some of those important business services. And you could argue that, again, this is one of those severe but plausible scenarios that will require your firms to be testing. So the regulator definition included here both the ability to prevent, adapt and respond to, and recover and learn from technology, cyber and other operational resilience. And it's clear now that the practicality of that is coming into play during the current crisis. If we can move on then, please, Julian, thank you. So what we've outlined here is 5 practical steps. It's our house view that we are supporting a number of our clients on that journey towards regulatory compliance. And it very much relates to the consultation papers that have been issued, and as I say, does have the kind of supporting foundations of the prerequisites, assuming disruptions will happen to that mindset change, making sure there is very clear accountability on who's responsible and how it be delegated, and governance with clear sign up, as we've said here, all the way to the board. And as you can see, we've called out specifically where that board sign off is required. So I'll just take a couple of minutes to go through these before we reflect on lessons learned and I hand over. So step 1, and the view is these are not necessarily running sequentially, because a number of these activities will be running pilots, and we've seen a number of them run concurrently to help really explore how they will work for individuals' organisations. So really first, looking at what are your important business services. What's that service where you provide, and again, we've got the definition, a service provided by a firm to an external end user where a disruption to the provision of the service could cause intolerable harm to consumers or market participants, market integrity, and the safety and soundness or financial stability. And really the key here is to focus on that outcome. What is the outcome expected by the customer? What is being delivered? And it needs to look across that outcome and be prioritised against financial stability, the viability of the firm, and harm done to customers or other participants. And there's a view, and we'll come to reflect on this, it might need to understand and meet changing demands. So what are the current important business services, but how might they need to change with some of the different scenarios? Moving on, and secondly in the process, is all around mapping each of those identified important business services. It's a known and key technique. It's been used throughout OCIR, but it's helped to identify some of the vulnerabilities and map the resources, the people, the processes, the technology, the facilities. But what we've taken as important here is to understand how the business services work and provide what we describe as an architectural view of those important business services. And the focus here is to enable organisations to identify their vulnerabilities and know what to fix, document that mapping and use it for the scenario stress testing, and inform where there are dependencies on other third parties, for example, on technology and potentially on facilities and on people. And it links very neatly into the impact tolerances. The consultation papers are very clear that the mapping is not there designed to be completely exhaustive, but is designed to achieve the outcome of the framework, and therefore needs to include third parties and other business services. And many may consider cloud, for example, one of those third parties. And it's worth noting the PRA also published a consultation paper at the same time as the operational resilience paper on outsourcing and third-party risk management. The third topic then is around the impact tolerances. I've already mentioned here, well, what is an impact tolerance? And I think this is one of those areas that is still highly debated. The definition coming from the regulators is the maximum tolerable level of disruption to an important business service, including the maximum tolerable duration of a disruption. They refined impact tolerances in the latest CP in December, and talked about them being a critical element in building resilience to help you ensure continuity of your services. They should be set from within. They should consider harm to consumers and the markets, the stability and the safety, as I called out earlier, of an organisation. And this is where the impact tolerance should also reflect the risk appetite of the business and be aligned with clear metrics. So it's important for you and your organisations to define that tolerable level of impact and then set yourselves thresholds for each of those to ensure that they're not breached, and or in the chance there may be a breach to an impact tolerance, we advise and recommend having a playbook so that you know how and when to engage your various governance and operating model mechanisms. A couple of other points on impact tolerance: suggested the inclusion of time, allowing firms to both define and measure their impact tolerance clearly, and also the definition talked about duration of disruption, describing it as a point by which harm needs to be reduced. Is that at a certain point in the month, a certain time in the calendar year, and or given other factors that need to be considered? So elapsed time is worth considering, as well as that disruption. And for many, if you're dual regulated, you may end up with multiple or a minimum of 2 impact tolerances. So it's important to be clear how your impact tolerances relate to business statements and are outcome based and reflect upon the important business services you have identified. As part of the impact tolerance, you may also look to consider taking stress testing, scenario stress testing. It's been described as one of the best ways to test current business continuity arrangements. Many of you may be still undergoing scenario stress testing and looking ahead to the future with the current pandemic. This enables you to identify both new risks and also set, as I alluded to, those kind of future impact tolerances and potentially improve upon your existing plans. When and why can't you remain within a tolerance, and therefore what do you need to potentially fix and or change? And there's various ways to consider scenario stress testing: tabletop exercises, simulations, live action events as examples, all considering where the roles and responsibilities lie, who's engaged within the organisation, and you can also importantly include and incorporate communications within the stress testing for stakeholders, both internal and external. And again, I would reflect that exercise has been well rehearsed by a number of our organisations that we're working with, and the internal and external communication is key. Finally, not least, really, the kind of final step is the self-assessments. The regulators have asked organisations to conduct regular self-assessments of their compliance with operational resilience requirements. These must be reviewed and approved by the board, and it requires firms to document each of the steps that I've just described, how they've identified their important business services, what and how the impact tolerance has been decided, and what level of scenario and stress testing you have performed. It also requires you to include a summary of the vulnerabilities that have been identified, and this is where the timeline becomes particularly clear. Albeit the timeline might start middle, early next year for 3 years. To have a summary of your vulnerabilities and have a plan and an outline of what needs to be addressed and by how and by when may include or may require investment. So therefore, there has never been a better time to start thinking about the journey towards operational resilience. And the board, as I've laid out on this slide, is critical to being able to review, challenge and approve at each of those 3 key steps that I've laid out. So moving on, what have we learned to date? I called a few there out as I went through some of those 5 steps. The key principles from our point of view, I don't believe will change. I think what it has done is shed the light more on the importance of building in resilience, and we refer to that as resilience by design, and really focus us on that changing mindset and culture. I think the next phase of response will provide time for reflection and planning. We're very likely to go through a period of uncertainty and disruption for the next 3, 12, possibly 18 months. And organisations need to ensure they look after their people and customers can respond quickly, modify if required operations to meet those changes in demand and supply, and potentially, as government restrictions change, make use of their resources and their third-party suppliers. The important business services may change. So again, highlighted through this pandemic is the less importance of cash. However, the response to fulfilling some of the government loans, CBILS, for example, mortgage holiday loan distributions, have been one of the important business services for many. And ensuring that your organisation is prepared to meet those demand changes may require you to look locally as well as globally. And government restrictions, health and safety restrictions may differ per location and per site. Success really will be contingent on the availability of your suppliers. I keep mentioning that comes out a lot. But it's important to review what is acceptable for you. What is that tolerable level of impact? And around the impact tolerance, our realisation is customers have actually been prepared to and have endured a prolonged level of impact. They've moved their services. On-set call centre services have increased, branch operations have declined, but customers actually have taken the advantage of moving to digital. And it also highlights the importance around substitution. Remote working has added resilience for many of us within our organisation. And I know many of our clients are now looking at their work area recovery sites and the use of on-site premises, and are these still required? I mentioned earlier the potential second wave. It reiterates the requirement around scenario testing. Potentially that second wave of a pandemic could be both severe and plausible. And I've had conversations with other clients on what happens if there's also an additional scenario, and or if we need to start removing some of the underlying assumptions, what happens next. And so really my kind of conclusion on the lessons been learned is it's important to implement that continuous improvement model. Have a model that is operating by design and preparing you for future incidents, preparing you for when operations are disrupted, and therefore embed that methodology into new systems, into changes, into processes from the outset, and consider where and how you might be able to substitute effectively in the event of disruption. It's an opportunity to both embrace and encourage that change. The adoption of remote working, accelerated customer digital adoption and digital capabilities. And just to conclude, it's clear that our current circumstances will influence the direction of operational resilience. I think it will validate the proposed UK regulatory approach that focuses on the strengthening the resilience of important scenarios. And I'm more than happy to take any further questions that you may have based on those prerequisites that I laid out, the 5 practical steps towards execution on the journey, and on supporting you on meeting those regulatory requirements. So thank you all for listening, and I look forward to questions later, and I'm handing you over to Belly, I believe.
Thank you, Sarah. Can I please ask Jimmy to go to my slides? So throughout my research, as I've been doing this work around operational resilience, I came across this brilliant slide. But before I go into the slide, I just want to give you this analogy in terms of, and to support what Sarah said in terms of how do you prepare yourself for complying to operational resilience or being operational resilient. So think of you traveling from, I'll put myself in this case, from South Africa to the UK. I need to buy a plane ticket. I need to go to a conference in the UK, and that conference is due whenever it's due. But I need to be at the UK on that particular date. I buy the plane ticket. I get, and I'm sorry to use this analogy under this COVID circumstances, but I think it is relevant in terms of the picture that I'm painting. So for me to get to the UK, I get to the airport on a particular date. when I get to the airport, I get to the check-in counter, a process happens. When that process happens, it could be one of two things. Firstly, they check if it's me on my passport, they check my luggage, and if my luggage exceeds a certain weight, then I'll be asked to pay. That is if I'm traveling domestic, but because I'm traveling domestic, I'll have to pay. Once that piece of process has happened, I then need to go to the security check-in. I go to the security check-in, they check if it's me, the ticket is validated, I then go through proceed. Once I proceed, I go to passports, to immigration center. I give them my passport, they confirm if it's me, they check the ticket, they stamp and look and do whatever they do in the background. They then hand me my passport and my ticket and they allow me to go through. Before I board the plane, another process happens. That process, I give it to the attendant, they take my passport, they take my ticket, then they check whatever they need to check, then they confirm if it's Thibedi Malebo, then they allow me to go through. When I go through, then I go to the lady that's welcoming people, all the passengers into the airplane, or the gentleman. They then check my passport, my ticket, and if the seat, and they point me to the right seat where I'll be sitting. I then sit, and the pilot and the cabin crew will do all the other things that I'm oblivious to before the plane takes off. The plane takes off, I land in the UK, and before landing, the pilot will do whatever they need to do, confirm with the tower which terminal we're using, and then we land. All those things which I've mentioned are services or are processes. All I wanted as Thibedi was a service which that will enable me to get from South Africa to the UK. What this picture highlights, it highlights all the dependencies that will enable me as a client to receive the service that I want. And for me to receive all the services, the service that I want, there are systems that I'm not aware of as a client. Those systems enable the processes to operate. Those systems require the people. There's the staff to enable the services to be delivered or the processes to be achieved. There are third-party dependencies. So if I land at the airport, as an example, we need to be shuttled from the airplane to the terminal. That's a dependency which we may not be aware of, but if that dependency is not seen or it is disrupted for whatever reason, it means that there'll be delay. And what I forgot to highlight is that when I get to London, I want to get to London at 8 o'clock in the morning because my conference starts at 10 o'clock. So if I'm delayed, I'm not going to achieve the services that I want. And coupled with that, there's the other businesses and there's a regulator that's sitting around this, making sure that all the service that Thibedi wants, it's achieved. And how do we do that? It is around understanding what enables operational resilience to operate. Sarah mentioned, how do we prepare ourselves? This picture clearly articulates how do you prepare yourself to say, in the event that system X, I'm looking at the systems now, system X is disrupted. It means the services that is linked to system X will not be achieved. So it's around identifying and on top of this, allow me to use the system reliable engineering capability, which then says I will predict where a disruption may happen, enable the right monitoring capabilities so that even if the disruption happens, Tibedi who needs to get to London, it is seamless for him. What this enables us to achieve, it enables us to achieve the following. It gives us that capability to prevent disruptions. To a point. Let me to a point. Prevent disruptions to a point. Yes, like I've said, using the SRE or system reliable engineering, you can prevent disruptions from happening to a point. Be able to adapt quickly. We are now faced with COVID-19. The world, in my experience, as I've said, in the 15 years, I've done a lot of simulation exercises. And in most cases, executives would challenge us and would say, that will never happen in a million years. COVID has made us has realized, or rather has made us to realize that that statement does not really hold water. It enables us to respond quickly, because when you have operational resilience, you know who are your stakeholders. You know what to say to the stakeholders. It helps us to safeguard our people, our assets, and most importantly, the brand, because if our clients lose trust in us and the loyalty that they have in terms of the service that we provide to our staff, we do not have a brand to protect. So the world is changing, and as the world changes, it's becoming reliable. It's becoming reliant on IT systems. Systems failures can disrupt and can lead to huge disruptions. Sarah mentioned earlier that the visa disruption that happened. Operational resilience enables us to identify where those disruptions could happen, so that we can prevent them from happening. Lastly, I would like to leave you with these words, and these come from Simon Sinek. And Simon Sinek says, always plan for the fact that no plan goes according to the plan. Operational resilience will enable you to plan to actually say, if system X goes down, I've got system Y that will enable me to provide the services. That's what, so I will then hand over to David to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to Sarah also. And I think one of the real themes that's coming out here is this kind of front to back view. And if something breaks that chain, the ability to recover. Obviously, you'd like to prevent, but as we've said, these things will occur. That is a question of fact. So maybe Jimmy, yeah. So if you could just stop on the key steps for a moment. So I won't talk through this. I think Sarah has covered all the elements of this already. This really here is just as a reminder of what the whole process looks like. And Jimmy, could you maybe just go to my assumptions slide? Thanks. So I wanted to talk about is seeing, I think, what some of the important drivers to actually get this done, and also where we're seeing maybe some people maybe deviating from what might think be the most efficient way to do this, because it is important to do this efficiently. So I think governance over the business as usual aspects, but also over the project. So the project to implement or achieve operational resilience, I think I'd expect the SMF 24 in the UK to be the sponsor. There can be more than one SMF 24, and I think some people do split it so that one covers IT and one other areas. But it's then really important that they work with the Chief Risk Officer and other senior management, the Head of Compliance for regulatory compliance. That this is a joined up approach is really, really important. And I think within the governance structure, like with many other things in this, it's not about reinventing the wheel. The building blocks for operational resilience have been in place for many, many years, decades. And it's really a question, I think, of leveraging, using those effectively, and really not getting in the way of ourselves when we're trying to do this. The roles of first, second, and third line need to be clearly understood, but they need to be clearly understood, I think, in risk, etc. So in a way, it's not new duties and responsibilities, it's just where there's operational resilience. And I think the first line are clearly responsible for implementing the framework. And then you've got the second line challenge, and audit is audit. But it really is important that that all works together. And I think, again, depending where the ball has landed from the board, potentially at the moment, in some cases, it seems that maybe the CRO is driving this forward. In some cases, it's the chief operating officer. I guess who drives it, as long as it ends up in the right place, and with cooperation and segregation of duty isn't being trampled all over, then in some ways, I guess that might be a practical thing for now. You need budget and resource to deliver this. You can't do this easily, and subject matter experts who'll get called into the project usually have day jobs, and because they're good at what they do, they normally are in demand for many other things. So you need to make sure that we can actually deliver the project. Also, what's your starting point? To know where you are, that initial gap analysis. And I think typically when you do that gap analysis, you might find things like cyber, your IT infrastructure, your premises, your resilience around those particular parts of your whole plan are actually probably not a bad state. We've seen through COVID that people have come to the fore, actually has as premises, whereas before it may be largely IT focused. I think another assumption is that you already have a risk and control framework in place, which can be used, can be leveraged to help you introduce resilience. If not, this is maybe an opportunity to actually say, to achieve resilience, we need to improve in these areas. And again, I think sometimes boards have maybe not been so focused. Business continuity has maybe not been top of the agenda for a board. They just want to hear everything's going to be okay if something does go wrong, but they're not necessarily been that accountable in the past. And so if I could maybe just go to the pitfalls slide, Jimmy, and then I'll try and wrap up. So we've got about 15 minutes for Q&A. Fragmentation, duplication. So it's quite possible that if people aren't working together, you could go off and start creating a whole new framework rather than using what you've already got. And I think one of the examples there is maybe around conduct risk. I've also already mentioned about the SMF24 and the chief risk officer working in partnership is important. I think another thing is also kind of call it getting into the weeds, but certainly on the mapping, I think you could disappear into a very large black hole if you try and map everything to the nth degree, because you map it, but then you've also got to maintain it. I think Sarah mentioned it's important to keep your eye on what you are trying to achieve from the mapping. So about identifying those vulnerabilities that will then come out through the stress testing, so you can then take action to address those vulnerabilities. So how you do it, and again, I think it's proportionate to each firm, is really important. The operational risk management framework, I think, is hugely important to be able to leverage that. It's maybe a bit of a chicken and egg question, which came first, operational risk or operational resilience. I think you could argue they've both been around for a long time, have then been given the names or frameworks, if you like, that we've later bestowed upon them. But they are closely interlinked, I think, whichever way you look at it. And then separately, talking about reinventing the wheel. So yes, business continuity management, crisis management, you should already have a communication plan. So you need to maybe look and update your communication plans. Cybersecurity, people should already be having that. We've also mentioned about third parties, outsourcing, including intra-group. There should already be controls in place around there, or if there isn't, then that is really important to get going. And then finally, this lack of senior management buy-in, which we've maybe seen in the past around things, and memories are short. Boards maybe don't want to invest in things that they hope will never happen, and certainly never happen on their watch, and think that if it does happen, they'll deal with it there. But I think the big change here is that board responsibility, certainly in the UK, that they can't duck away from this. They have to do this self-assessment. So in doing that, I think we will achieve the senior management buy-in that maybe has been lacking in the past. So with that, Jimmy, if I hand back to you, and then hopefully you can get on with the Q&A.
That's great. Thank you, David, and thank you all of you for really interesting presentations. So we have about 15 minutes for a bit of Q&A, and as before, we've got plenty of questions coming through from you, the audience. Now, one of the questions that has come through, and it was certainly on our list, and it's a question that I think everyone is asking around operational resilience, is what is the relationship between operational resilience, operational risk management, business continuity management, and even enterprise risk management? So maybe if I think that's such a fundamental question, maybe if I ask each of you to give your thoughts on that, maybe starting with Sarah.
Yeah, of course. And as we say, there's not a surprise. And I think both David and I have touched on it actually, as being able to leverage what already exists. Because actually all of them ultimately are risks which, if not properly controlled, threaten operational resilience and potentially threaten financial resilience. So actually the view and the conversations I've had with clients are how operational risk managers can help support, potentially drive, but actually challenge some of the execution that we've been talked about here, with some of that practical steps. And actually there is opportunity to leverage tooling around operational risk management, tooling which can be used to help support those relationships and those dependencies. Often third-party risk management may have their own tooling and enablers, and I know many organisations are looking again at other tools and accelerators to support their own journey around operational resilience. So fundamentally for me, I think it's important to recognise where those frameworks will help support the regulatory regime, where the expertise might sit within those teams, and making sure that those teams collectively are involved and engaged and are ready to challenge. I very clearly laid out the role of the board, and making sure really that the capabilities, and it's all about having the right capabilities within the organisation, are there and thought of, rather than trying to duplicate and over-engineer some of the activity that exists. So it will take a very strong leader, whether that's within the SMF 24 and or that delegation of responsibilities, to be executing and efficiently pulling it all together.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Tibeli, you have thoughts on this question?
Thanks, Jimmy. The one key word which Sarah mentioned, and I think it encapsulates my answer, is the ability to leverage. So operational risk, as easily as it's defined, it's the loss of risk due to losses or unforeseen events due to processes. Sorry, I'm getting myself mixed up here, but processes, systems, and external events. Business continuity says there are three things that we need to look at. It's people, which talks to emergency management, is crisis management, and IT continuity. Operational resilience then says, well, how do you enable the continuity of operations in the event of a disruption? So the reason why I'm using the word leverage is because you cannot separate the three. The three are intertwined, and the three will enable an organization to ensure that it can continue to provide for its clients. The regulator wants to ensure that the public, the clients, can achieve the services that they expect from any firm that they want to do services with. So it's not a business continuity matter. It's not an operational risk matter or an operational resilience matter. It's a collaboration of the three, and the three need to leverage, including enterprise risk management, obviously. And enterprise risk management enables us to talk to the board and say, these are the strategic things that we want to focus on, and we will drive operational risk to achieve the following. And business continuity, or BCM, is one of those enablers. Operational resilience then takes it to the next level to then say, what will enable us not to be disrupted? I think, yeah, I'll then hand over to David if you has anything to add.
Yeah, sure. Maybe one thing, Jimmy, I don't know, obviously time is short and I think there's maybe a lot of questions, so I don't know if people want to continue this afterwards, if they could maybe give those to you somehow. So I'm landing this on you, and then we can maybe continue the debate as appropriate. But just on, I guess, operational resilience versus business continuity, or I'll say disaster recovery. So if I rewind a few years, we'd all come in on a Sunday, we'd shift systems over from one data center to another, we'd bring up the systems, then people would sit there, they'd do their work, we could say, yes, that's fine. And then we'd all go away again saying we've passed the test. Or maybe something wasn't recovered, and then you figure out how to fix it. So for me, that's an important building block in resilience, because you have, you can rely on the fact you can shift data centers if you need to. And okay, the world's moved on, you have things mirrored and all the rest of it. Things are a lot more sophisticated now. But what we weren't doing when we were doing that, we weren't looking end to end. So we were just saying, can we operate the system? The answer was yes. So in resilience, the chain could be broken anywhere because you need to receive the customer order. If it's a payment, for instance, that needs to flow in, it needs to be authenticated, it needs to be validated, it needs to flow through sanctions, etc. And then it needs to make its way through to the payment team, and then you execute the payment. So for me, that is kind of one of the fundamental differences.
Great, thank you all. Now, Sarah, there's a question that's come in specifically for you, and I think in your comments you mentioned the possibility of the current UK operational resilience requirements being strengthened, which hopefully didn't cause too much alarm with the audience. But the question is, do you know if the regulators are currently drafting revised proposals, and whether you have any insights?
Yeah, no, fine. And I think strengthen to reflect the principles that already exist would be bringing that to context. So for me, and we speak with the regulators, and I've also been part of forums. Now, the principles will still apply. I think what's happening is reflection upon those lessons learned. So it's more, we believe, embedding those in reality and in practice. So actually the principles, the steps I've laid out and the execution on that journey, for me, it's just highlighting the importance of not delaying the start, not waiting until the actual regulatory regime and kind of supervisory measures come into effect potentially next year, but actually using the opportunity now to start thinking about that journey. And the ones that I keep calling out around mindset, around culture, around operating model and change and possibly investment, therefore that is a journey. And to achieve that, it's better to start sooner than later and reflect in your own organisations on some of those learnings coming out of the current C-19 pandemic.
Great, thanks very much, Sarah. So another question that's come in from the audience. Maybe this is one for you, David. Someone has asked, they've said they're struggling to see what's new in terms of the operational resilience agenda, Shouldn't all of this have already been done over the past 15 years?
Great question. And I think maybe you've heard from the debate today that actually this is not new. It's maybe a new label with a new emphasis and a new way of looking at things. And again, Sarah probably knows better than me on this, but you know, in a way, I think the CPs, the DPs have come out because people haven't been addressing this. I don't know if seriously is the right word, but the world has got much more complex. Systems have got much more complex. When they break now, it's a lot more difficult to put them back together. It used to be relatively straightforward. So I think that whole interconnectedness on how we see things, and I've also noticed that someone's mentioned about IBM having an outage, which I think is to do with their cloud service. So in a way, that's a perfect example of resilience. So, you know, people relying on that service today, if that's been down for several hours, does that mean that they can't provide their important business services to their customers? So what would the tolerance for the customers be around that? Is it 2 hours, 4 hours, 24 hours? And do they have an alternative? Or could the customer get something by a different way, substitution? So I think in some ways, and I think what the regulators here have done is really great. They're giving kind of structure and form to how this can be done, which I think will end up being kind of global leading practice, best practice at the moment, because I think other regulators will follow.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I think another question, perhaps I'll direct this at you, Tibeli. How do you think this focus on operational resilience will impact the role of the operational risk manager?
Oh, interesting one. The quick answer to that is it will improve the role of the operational risk manager. Why? And that's the million-dollar question. And I guess for me is the role of a operational risk manager is to challenge the business in terms of making sure that the right controls are in place. Operational resilience then enables us to drill down to say, from a business resilience or business continuity, in this particular case, operational resilience, does the organization have the right controls in place? Can we service our clients? Can the board, in the event that the regulator comes and says, please, let's have a conversation around the table, take us through your operational resilience capability. The operational risk manager will then have the comfort to sit with the regulator and say, this is how we manage operational resilience within the organization. So hence my answer said, it's a tricky one, but it will empower and it will make the job of the operational risk manager a lot easier.
I'll just jump in and to reflect that as well. You know, I've made a point of saying that assume disruption will happen. Yeah, operational risk managers, you try and reduce the probability of an event occurring. You have controls in place and you're monitoring against them. Now we are changing that mindset and saying, however undesirable, disruption will occur. So I also think there's a role for operational risk managers to look at how prepared an organisation is and what the tolerance an organisation may have. So the impact tolerance, the preparedness in relation to kind of their customers, the business and the financial stability. So I think there's a clear role there to help and challenge and understand the importance of those business services and therefore what happens in the event of a disruption.
Great, thank you very much. And we're pretty much out of time. That's gone very quickly. I will just finish with a wonderful quote from Nick Strange at the PRA, which I think should be good news to all operational risk practitioners, where he was talking about operational resilience. And he said, this renewed interest in operational risk and resilience suggests to me that there's never been a better time to be an operational risk practitioner, which I think is certainly true. So on that note, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Sarah, Tibeli and David for a really interesting session. As we expected, it's been a very popular one. A lot of questions have come through, and I'm sure we will be revisiting this topic in the future. Just finally then, look out for our next event, which is on the 29th of June on risk governance oversight. So this was an event that was due to be hosted by Nationwide, but because of COVID, obviously we're doing it as an online only event. But we still have a great set of speakers. We've got Julia Dunn, who's the CRO at Nationwide, giving an introduction, and we've got a number of other speakers, Chris Bird talking about the Risk Coalition, and we've got a great panel as well to explore some of the issues around risk governance oversight. In terms of this series of webinars, so the next one will be in mid-July on this terrible new popular phrase, the new normal, but we'll be exploring that and exactly what it could mean. Okay, so on that note, I will thank you very much for joining this webinar, and see you next